In the sterile hospital corridor, Michael Harris stands frozen before the viewing window, 62 years of certainty crumbling beneath fluorescent lights. His weathered hand trembles against the glass, betraying the truth his mind refuses to accept. The newborn behind it cannot possibly be his son. Coffee from the waiting room turns bitter on his tongue as the first silent tear tracks down his lined face. Decades of trust built with Amanda dissolve with each heartbeat, each memory of nursery preparations now cruel mockery. Memories flash, their wedding day, retirement plans, the crib he assembled with arthritic hands, all tainted by this moment's devastating clarity. Has betrayal ever struck you when joy should have been yours? Share your story below. Like if this breaks your heart, follow to see how Michael finds the strength to choose truth over comfort. His breath fogs the glass as he withdraws his hand, shoulders straightening slightly. The nurse approaches with paperwork, unaware that her routine request will become his first stand against deception. Michael Harris stood motionless before the nursery window, 62 years of certainty crumbling beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Through the glass, the newborn, supposedly his son, slept peacefully, unaware of the impossible truth Michael's eyes couldn't deny. The baby's features, the skin tone, the shape of the nose, none matched his own. A tear escaped, tracking silently down his weathered cheek. He didn't bother wiping it away. The antiseptic scent of the hospital corridor mixed with the salt of his tears, creating a bitter cocktail of betrayal. Behind him, visitors' cheerful voices echoed against linoleum, the sound of joy he could no longer access. Not possible. Can't be mine. The words formed in his mind, but stayed locked behind the knot in his throat. Months of excited preparation. The crib assembly that had aggravated his arthritis. The tiny clothes folded with care. Amanda's reassurances when he'd questioned the timing, all of it poisoned now. His fingertips pressed harder against the glass, as if trying to reach through to a truth less devastating. The squeak of rubber-soled shoes approached, and Michael struggled to compose himself. "Mr. Harris, your wife is asking for you." The nurse smiled, clipboard extended. "We need your signature on the birth certificate." Michael's hand trembled slightly as he pulled it from the window, leaving behind 5 fingerprints like evidence at a crime scene. He couldn't form words, managing only a nod as his mind raced. Birth certificate, father's signature, legal responsibility. The implications crashed over him in waves. "Sir, are you all right?" The nurse's voice softened, her professional smile faltering as she noticed his tear-streaked face. "Fine," he managed, the word cracking between his lips. "Just emotional, not a lie, but nowhere near the truth." The clock on the wall ticked, marking seconds of his old life slipping away. Another tear threatened, and he blinked it back fiercely. Not here, not publicly. The dignity of privacy was all he had left. I'll be there in a minute," he said, straightening his shoulders with effort. The nurse nodded and retreated, her shoes squeaking a diminishing rhythm down the corridor. Alone again, Michael leaned against the cold wall for support as his knees threatened to buckle. In that moment of weakness, memories of Amanda's recent behavior, the password-protected phone, the work events that colleagues never mentioned, her insistence on handling all pregnancy appointments herself, aligned into damning clarity. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Amanda's text. "Where are you?" "The nurse is waiting with the paperwork." "Come sign it now, please." The urgency in her words, not concern for him, but for the signature, was the final confirmation he didn't want to face. Michael took a deep, steadying breath and pushed himself away from the wall. The tears had stopped, replaced by something harder forming in his chest. Footsteps approached from around the corner. Michael turned, wondering if it was the nurse returning or someone else, someone who might be part of this deception that had been planned and executed right under his trusting nose. Michael Harris withdrew the handkerchief from his pocket, a Christmas gift from 3 years back, and wiped the moisture from his face. The soft cotton, monogrammed by Amanda herself, now felt like sandpaper against his skin. He tucked it away with deliberate care, buying precious seconds to compose himself before facing what waited in that hospital room. He squared his shoulders, a gesture from his working days when difficult clients required a mask of certainty. And the corridor stretched before him, each step on the squeaking linoleum bringing him closer to a confrontation he never imagined facing at 62. The room was awash in afternoon sunlight that did nothing to warm the chill spreading through his chest. Amanda reclined in bed, her smile too bright, too practiced when she spotted him. "There you are," she said, voice higher than normal. "The nurse has been waiting." The nurse stood beside the bed, clipboard balanced on her forearm, pen extended toward Michael like a weapon. "Just need your signature on the birth certificate, Mr. Harris. Father's information section." His gaze fixed on the father line, black and stark against the white form. The pen hovered in his hand, suspended in the space between truth and lies. Behind his glasses, Michael's eyes burned with fresh tears he refused to shed. "Michael?" Amanda's voice sharpened with anxiety. Her fingers gripped the sheet, knuckles whitening. "It's just paperwork." "Sign it now while the nurse is here." "Just paperwork. Just a lie made official. Just the rest of my life." Memory flashed. Amanda guarding her phone these past months, stepping into the hallway for calls. The password changed to something he didn't know after 15 years of transparency between them. The pieces had been there all along, floating separately in his consciousness until this moment crystallized them into undeniable pattern. "I think," he said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the crack on the first word, "I need some time." He placed the pen down on the side table with a soft click that seemed to echo in the suddenly silent room. The nurse's professional mask slipped momentarily, her eyes darting between husband and wife with uncomfortable awareness. "It's a simple form," Amanda pressed, reaching for his hand. Her touch, once comforting through decades of marriage, now sent a chill through him. "The baby needs a father." "Yes," Michael agreed, stepping back from her reach. "He does." He moved toward the door, fighting the tremor that threatened his legs. Behind him, he heard Amanda's breathing quicken with panic. "Where are you going?" The pitch of her voice climbed higher. "Michael?" At the threshold he paused, unable to look back. "I just need a moment," he managed, the understatement of his life. A tear threatened again, but dignity, the companion of his later years, kept it in check until he could find privacy. In the hallway, just beyond the door, he heard Amanda's urgent whisper into her phone. "He won't sign it." He looked at the baby, and now he won't sign. "I think he knows." The last thread of doubt snapped. Michael's hand braced against the wall as the truth solidified into certainty. The child in that nursery wasn't his son, and his wife of 38 years had planned to trap him in a lie that would alter the remainder of his life. The key slid into the lock with a familiar click that now seemed to mock the unfamiliarity of his circumstances. Michael stepped into the silent house, dropping his keys heavily into the ceramic bowl Amanda had made in that pottery class 5 summers ago. The sound echoed through rooms that felt suddenly foreign, as if he'd entered a stranger's home wearing his own clothes. Light spilled from the nursery down the hallway, a soft yellow beacon he'd once anticipated would guide midnight feedings and early morning comforts. Now it illuminated nothing but deception. He moved toward it, steps hesitant, then stopped at the threshold, unable to cross into the space they'd prepared together. His fingers traced the doorframe where pencil marks tracked the growth of Amanda's nieces and nephews over holiday visits. Family, truth, legacy. All words that had meant something concrete this morning now turned to vapor. The crib stood half-assembled against the wall. Directions spread across the floor where he'd left them yesterday, a lifetime ago, when his back had protested the bending. Tiny clothes in neutral yellows and greens lay folded on the changing table. A mobile of stars and moons hung ready to delight eyes that carried someone else's genetics. Who are you? The question formed, meant not for the absent child, but for the woman he'd shared his life with, the woman who had constructed this elaborate fraud. He retreated to the kitchen, unable to bear the nursery's cheerful lies. Amanda's laptop sat centered on the oak table, positioned with the casual confidence of someone who believed their secrets safe. Michael sank into his usual chair, the wood creaking under his weight in a house suddenly too quiet without the evening news playing in the background. The computer's blank screen reflected his face, lined, tired, old, in a way he hadn't been that morning. He reached toward the power button, then hesitated, fingertips hovering over the smooth surface. The password. Would he know it? Had that changed, too? He remembered last month, glancing over as Amanda logged in, catching the hint she'd set. Our secret. He'd thought nothing of it then, assumed it referenced an anniversary trip or Christmas gift. The irony twisted his mouth into something between a grimace and a bitter smile. Tears came again, falling freely now in the privacy of his kitchen, splashing onto the closed laptop. These weren't the shocked tears of the hospital. These burned hotter, carrying the first embers of anger beneath the grief. 38 years of trust, decades of shared history, all of it now requiring re-examination through the lens of this betrayal. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve, the cotton damp from earlier tears. His jaw set with determination that straightened his shoulders. If there was evidence of this deception, and there must be, he would find it. The methodical attention to detail that had served him well in his accounting career would now be turned to uncovering the extent of Amanda's lies. With renewed purpose, he opened the laptop. The login screen glowed blue in the darkening kitchen. He began typing possible passwords, starting with the obvious, her birth date, their anniversary, before trying Colorado trip, remembering a business conference she'd attended 3 years ago. Nothing worked. Then, on impulse, he tried Colorado secret. The screen unlocked, opening to her email. A small, strangled sound escaped him, part sob, part vindication. What had happened in Colorado that required secrecy? And what else would he discover in these folders named with innocuous labels like family planning and future arrangements? Outside, the sound of a car pulling into the neighbor's driveway momentarily startled him from his grim task. The headlights swept across the kitchen window, briefly illuminating the wedding photo hanging on the wall. A younger Michael and Amanda, faces alight with promises, now revealed as hollow. With a steadying breath, he clicked on the first folder. The blue glow of the laptop screen cast harsh shadows across Michael's face as he navigated through Amanda's email account. His reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, a necessity of age that now served a purpose he'd never imagined, uncovering his wife's betrayal in painful digital detail. First, he checked her sent items, methodically sorting by recipient. A name appeared repeatedly over the past year. David Mercer. Not a name from their social circle, not a colleague she'd ever mentioned. The frequency of communication raised the first flag. The timestamps of late-night exchanges raised the second. "Found a name," Michael murmured to the empty kitchen, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. The house creaked in response, an old companion witnessing his unraveling marriage. He opened the earliest email to this David from 14 months ago. Innocent enough. Discussion of a professional conference in Denver, Colorado. His finger hovered over the keyboard, a slight tremor betraying the emotion he struggled to contain. He continued forward chronologically, watching the evolution from professional exchanges to personal confidences to intimate discussions that made his stomach clench. Then he found it. An email titled simply, "Our Plan." Dated 5 months ago when Amanda had first announced her unexpected pregnancy. The message opened like a wound on the screen. "David, it's confirmed. I'm pregnant. Michael believes it's his, and there's no reason he should suspect otherwise. At his age, he's so thrilled by the miracle that he's not questioning the timing or anything else. Once the baby is born and he's on the birth certificate, we'll have everything we need. His retirement accounts, the house equity, it all becomes family assets I can access for us eventually. For the good of our future family, we just need to be patient. Remember what happened in Colorado? We moved too quickly. This time, we do it right. Soon, Amanda." A sound escaped Michael's throat. Not quite a sob, not quite a growl. His fist came down hard on the desk, rattling the framed photo of their 35th anniversary cruise. The glass cracked beneath his knuckles, a physical manifestation of his shattering world. "For the good of our future family," he read aloud, the words bitter as ash. His voice broke on family, the betrayal compounded by the calculated coldness. This wasn't a momentary weakness or a passionate mistake. This was methodical, predatory, and Colorado, that mysterious reference again. He searched for older emails, scrolling back further, and found fragments of another story. Apparently, Amanda had attempted something similar before, with a previous affair partner in Denver, a hasty divorce filing withdrawn when the man demanded a paternity test that proved negative. Michael's breath came faster, anger replacing shock. The tears that fell now were hot, fueled by indignation as much as hurt. The printer in his home office whirred to life as he began creating a paper trail of evidence. Each damning email forwarded to his own account, then printed and carefully placed in chronological order. "Focus," he told himself, a command from his professional days when emotions threatened clarity. Document everything. He discovered more: exchanges with an attorney consulting on family law, discussions about securing Michael's financial support, calculations of his retirement benefits. One message mentioned that David had been keeping track of Michael's schedule to arrange their meetings. The betrayal extended beyond the marital bed into a conspiracy to exploit him financially, to take advantage of his age, his trust, his resources carefully built over decades of work. To use his desire for family legacy against him. When Amanda had claimed the password hint, "Our Secret," referred to the surprise of her pregnancy, it had been the first link in a chain of lies designed to bind him to a child that wasn't his. As dawn light began filtering through the kitchen windows, Michael realized he'd been reading all night. His eyes burned, his back ached, but his mind remained razor-sharp. The scattered pieces had formed a clear picture. His wife had conspired with her lover to commit paternity fraud for financial gain. He organized the printed emails into a folder, hands steadier now with purpose. The accountant's precision, the methodical approach to problem-solving that had defined his career, now directed itself toward self-preservation. Each piece of evidence labeled, each inconsistency noted, the printer suddenly stopped mid-job, its paper tray empty. Michael released a frustrated sob as he fumbled to reload it, his fingers clumsy with exhaustion and emotion. The momentary struggle seemed to embody his situation, temporarily halted but determined to continue. His phone buzzed on the table, a text from Amanda. "Coming home this afternoon with the baby. Make sure the crib is finished. We'll be a family at last." Michael stared at the message, the calculated deception behind its cheerful facade now transparent. The phone slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the folder of evidence that would ensure this fraud went no further. He needed legal counsel. He needed to understand his options before Amanda returned to continue her charade. And above all, he needed to protect himself from the elaborate trap set by the woman he'd loved and trusted for nearly 4 decades. The tears had stopped now. In their place, a cold, clear resolve took hold. Michael Harris, respected accountant, devoted husband, expectant father, had died sometime during the night. In his place stood a man determined to reclaim his dignity, his legacy, and his future from those who sought to steal them. Sunday dinner had been a Harris family tradition for over 30 years. Michael would grill in summer, roast in winter, while Amanda prepared sides and relatives brought desserts. The oak dining table, purchased when they'd bought the house, had witnessed celebrations, arguments, reconciliations, and the steady rhythm of family life. Today, it bore only a single place setting. Michael straightened the solitary fork against the napkin, adjusting it with the precision that had once been professional habit and was now a desperate grasp for normalcy. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked accusingly in the silence, marking seconds that stretched like hours. 3 days had passed since his meeting with William Bennett, a family law attorney recommended by his longtime friend Thomas. The consultation had been both validating and devastating. "Paternity fraud," Bennett had said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Unfortunately, I've seen this before. Men your age are particularly vulnerable targets, established, financially secure, often with significant retirement assets." Michael had flinched at "your age," though he knew it was merely factual. 62 wasn't ancient, but it placed him in a demographic where second families were rare enough to be celebrated rather than questioned. "The DNA test is crucial," Bennett had continued. "Without it, many courts would still hold you responsible for child support, despite the deception. We need to act quickly before your name appears on any birth certificate." Now, waiting for a family that wouldn't come, Michael contemplated the test results folder on the sideboard. The clinical language contained a simple truth. There was zero possibility that he was the father of Amanda's child. Scientific confirmation of what his eyes had known instantly in that hospital nursery. He'd called his brother Robert first, needing the support of the person who'd known him longest. The conversation had not gone as expected. "Are you sure you're not just overreacting?" Robert had asked, doubt evident even through the phone. "Amanda's always been devoted to you. Maybe there's a medical explanation, recessive genes or something." "I have the emails, Rob. She planned this with another man. They discussed how to trap me financially." "That doesn't sound like Amanda," his brother had said. "Maybe you're misinterpreting things. At our age, sometimes we get suspicious." The dismissal had stung worse than the betrayal itself. At our age. As if his judgment had deteriorated along with his eyesight, requiring stronger prescription lenses. Michael's fork pushed mashed potatoes around his plate, appetite absent along with his dinner guests. He'd invited Robert again tonight to show him the evidence in person. His brother had declined, citing a previous engagement that Michael strongly suspected was fabricated. Amanda's side of the family had closed ranks entirely. Her sister had called Michael delusional when he'd attempted to explain. Her parents had refused his calls. The narrative forming among them cast him as a confused old man, perhaps struggling with paranoia or early dementia. A tear slipped down Michael's cheek, landing on the empty chair where Amanda usually sat. The secondary betrayal of family members doubting his perception cut almost as deeply as the original deception. These people had known him for decades, his character, his rationality, his honesty, yet they chose to believe he'd suddenly become mentally unsound rather than consider Amanda capable of calculated deception. He reached for the wine glass, then withdrew his hand. Clarity mattered now more than comfort. The candle at the center of the table flickered, casting dancing shadows across family photos lining the buffet. Images of holidays, anniversaries, and casual gatherings, all featuring the smiling face of a woman he now realized he'd never truly known. His phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "The family is worried about you, Michael. Dr. Levine can see you tomorrow. I think you're having some confusion issues. Let me help you through this." The calculated manipulation would have been almost admirable if it weren't so devastating. She was building a narrative of his mental decline to discredit him before he could expose her fraud. If family members already doubted him, how would this play out in a legal setting? Has someone's betrayal left you standing alone while others took their side? Share your story below, like if this breaks your heart. Follow to see if Michael's family eventually recognizes the truth. The fork slipped from Michael's fingers, clattering against the plate in the empty dining room. The sound echoed like a starting gun, propelling him to his feet. He couldn't sit here drowning in isolation and self-pity. He needed to fight back with the same methodical precision that had defined his professional life. If Amanda wanted to paint him as confused, he would demonstrate unassailable clarity. If family doubted his perception, he would present evidence they couldn't dismiss. If age was being used against him, he would transform it into an asset, the wisdom of experience, the patience of years, the careful calculation that youth often lacked. As he cleared his barely touched dinner, Michael's phone rang. His brother's name appeared on the screen. He answered with cautious hope. "Mike?" Robert's voice sounded strained. "I've been thinking about what you said. Amanda called me again today, talking about getting you evaluated for cognitive issues. It didn't sit right. That's not the brother I know." A weight lifted slightly from Michael's shoulders. "I have everything documented, Rob, if you're willing to look." "I am now," his brother replied. "And Mike, Amanda's sister, called me too. Said she found something in Amanda's old journals you should see, something about Colorado." Michael's hand tightened on the phone. "Tell her to bring them. I think we're finally getting to the truth." The empty chairs around his dining table suddenly seemed less accusatory, more like spaces waiting to be filled by those who recognize truth when presented with it. The isolation that had threatened to crush him began to recede, one ally at a time. The envelope containing the DNA test results sat on William Bennett's polished mahogany desk, its clinical white surface reflecting the afternoon sunlight streaming through tall office windows. Michael's hands, which had trembled at the hospital days ago, now held the paper with remarkable steadiness as he passed it to his attorney. "Zero possibility of paternity," Bennett confirmed, scanning the document. "The science is unequivocal. Michael nodded, the words simultaneously painful and validating. Scientific confirmation of what his instincts had recognized in that hospital nursery. The child was not his. The relief of verification mingled with grief for what he'd believed was his future. "This is the cornerstone of our case," Bennett continued, adding the test results to the growing evidence folder. "Combined with the emails documenting intention to commit fraud, we have a solid foundation." The office, with its leather-bound law books and orderly filing system, provided a sanctuary of logic and process amid the emotional chaos of the past week. Here, in this space where facts mattered more than feelings, Michael found his footing again. A knock at the door interrupted them. Bennett's assistant ushered in Robert, Michael's brother, whose expression had transformed from skepticism to grim support since reviewing the evidence the previous evening. "Sorry I'm late," Robert said, placing a hand on Michael's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that meant more than any words could convey. "Diane's flight was delayed. She's coming straight here from the airport." Diane, Amanda's sister, the unexpected ally who had reached out through Robert after finding journals that apparently documented a pattern of behavior Michael was only beginning to understand. "How are you holding up?" Robert asked, taking the seat beside Michael. "Better," Michael answered truthfully. The tears that had flowed so freely in the solitude of his kitchen had given way to a composed determination. "Having you believe me, it matters, Rob." Robert's eyes, so similar to his own, reflected a mixture of regret and resolve. "I should have trusted you from the start. When Amanda called suggesting you needed psychiatric evaluation, something felt wrong. You've always been the most level-headed person I know." The door opened again, admitting a woman Michael recognized from family gatherings but had never known well. Amanda's younger sister Diane, her travel weariness evident in the shadows beneath her eyes and the creases in her clothing. "Mr. Harris," she began formally, then softened. "Michael, I owe you an apology." She placed a worn leather journal on the desk, her fingers lingering on its cover, as if reluctant to expose its contents. "I found this when clearing out our parents' attic last month. I didn't think much of it then, just Amanda's old diary from her time in Colorado. But after your accusations—" She adjusted her glasses, a nervous habit Michael had noticed at family gatherings. "I read it. I shouldn't have, but something told me I needed to. There's a pattern here you need to see." Bennett carefully opened the journal to pages marked with colored tabs. Michael leaned forward, recognizing Amanda's handwriting, the same flowing script that had signed anniversary cards and grocery lists throughout their marriage. The entries detailed a relationship with a man named Thomas Whitaker in Denver, plans for financial security through marriage, and the subsequent disappointment when a pregnancy ended in miscarriage before she could secure the arrangement. The clinical calculation behind the words made Michael's stomach tighten. "There's more," Diane said quietly. "This wasn't her first attempt at this strategy. There are references to 2 other men before you, Michael, relationships that ended when similar plans fell through." Michael removed his reading glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose as he processed this new information. "She planned this from the beginning. Our entire marriage?" Diane's expression softened with genuine regret. "I don't know. There are gaps in the journals, years missing, but the pattern is clear in what's recorded. Amanda has always been strategic about relationships." Bennett was already making notes, his pen moving rapidly across his legal pad. "This establishes a history that strengthens our case considerably. Ms. Harris," he addressed Diane, "would you be willing to provide a formal statement about finding these journals?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Amanda is my sister, but what she's doing is wrong. Using a child this way, manipulating a good man's trust. Her voice trailed off, the family loyalty clearly at war with her sense of justice. "Thank you," Michael said simply, a weight lifting from his shoulders with each piece of validating evidence. The doubt that had plagued him, was he overreacting, misinterpreting, being paranoid as his family had suggested, dissolved in the face of concrete proof. Robert leaned forward, his gardener's hands strong and certain as he tapped the evidence folder. "What's the next step?" "Amanda's already trying to paint Michael as confused and unreliable. We need to move quickly." "We file for an emergency hearing," Bennett replied, his confidence reassuring. "With this documentation and these witnesses, we can request the court block any attempt to establish paternity. Then we proceed with divorce on grounds of fraud." Michael nodded, tears of a different kind threatening now, not the devastated sobs of discovery or the isolated tears of family division, but a relieved validation that the truth would be acknowledged. "The court date will likely be next week," Bennett continued. "I suggest you prepare yourself, Michael. Amanda won't surrender her plans easily. This will become confrontational." "I'll be there with him," Robert promised, his earlier doubt completely erased. "As will I," Diane added, her loyalty now firmly transferred to justice rather than family ties. For the first time since that moment at the hospital nursery window, Michael felt the faintest stirring of hope. The systematic dismantling of his marriage and the attempted exploitation of his trust were being met with equally systematic resistance. His methodical nature, once taken advantage of as predictable, now served as his greatest strength. As they finalized the strategy, Michael's hand passed over the organized evidence: emails, DNA results, journal entries, witness statements, each piece meticulously labeled and arranged. The accountant's precision that had defined his professional life had found new purpose in reclaiming his personal dignity. "We have everything we need," Bennett assured him, closing the folder with a decisive motion. "The truth is on your side, Michael." A single tear escaped, quickly wiped away, as Michael stood with newfound resolve. The path ahead would be difficult, public, and painful, but it would lead to vindication and eventually freedom from deception. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady and certain. "Ready to face Amanda, ready to stand before a judge, ready to reclaim the remaining years of his life from those who sought to exploit them." The fear and isolation that had threatened to overwhelm him had transformed into determined purpose. He was no longer alone in his truth, and that made all the difference. Michael Harris straightened his tie with hands that no longer trembled. The charcoal suit, reserved for weddings, funerals, and his final day before retirement, hung slightly looser on his frame after a week of sleepless nights and forgotten meals, but the man who wore it stood taller than he had in days. Morning light streamed through the bedroom window, illuminating the wedding photo he hadn't yet removed from the dresser. 38 years reduced to evidence in a legal proceeding. He allowed himself one moment of grief before tucking it away beneath layers of resolve. "Ready?" Robert's voice called from downstairs, solid and supportive. "Coming," Michael replied, taking a final glance in the mirror. The face that looked back was lined with age and recent strain, but the eyes were clear and determined. No one seeing him today would question his mental competence. The doorbell rang as he descended the stairs. Diane stood on the porch, clutching Amanda's journals to her chest like unwanted burdens. Behind her, Thomas Reed waited beside his car, the first of several supporters forming today's convoy to the courthouse. "I found more," Diane said without preamble, her voice low as she stepped inside. Amanda's been on the phone with their attorney all night. She's claiming temporary insanity due to postpartum hormones. Says she wasn't in her right mind when she wrote those emails. Michael absorbed this information with a nod. The strategy was predictable. Another attempt to manipulate perception rather than acknowledge truth. "Will it work?" he asked, directing the question to Robert, who had consulted with Bennett last night. "Bennett says no. The timeline is too extended, too calculated. The journals Diane found establish a pattern going back years." Robert's hand landed on Michael's shoulder, firm and grounding. "Truth wins today, Mike." A tear threatened at this simple statement of faith, quickly blinked away. Michael had shed enough tears in private. Today called for the dignity of composure. The drive to the courthouse passed in contemplative silence. Michael watched familiar streets roll by, the community where he and Amanda had built what he'd thought was a shared life. The coffee shop where they'd met for lunch dates. The park where they'd walked Sunday afternoons. Places now colored by the knowledge that while he'd been fully present, she'd been calculating her next move. The courthouse loomed ahead, its stone facade and broad steps designed to intimidate as much as impress. Several news vans lined the curb. Apparently, paternity fraud involving respected community members warranted local coverage. "Ignore them," Thomas advised as they parked. "Eyes forward, steady pace. Standing up against a liar takes courage, especially when they've fooled others." Comment your moment of vindication, like for strength, follow now to witness the justice Michael deserves. Michael nodded, grateful for the guidance. His career had prepared him for spreadsheets and audits, not public scrutiny. As they approached the entrance, more supporters appeared, colleagues from his accounting firm, neighbors who'd witnessed his character over decades, even Amanda's cousin, who'd apparently seen through the deception long before others. The marble floors of the courthouse echoed beneath their footsteps, the sound amplifying into a rhythm of purpose. Hushed conversations paused as their group passed, the solidarity behind Michael making a statement before a single legal argument was presented. Outside courtroom C, William Bennett waited with his leather portfolio, expression confident but serious. "Michael," he greeted, shaking his hand firmly. "Our filing is first on the docket." Judge Winters is known for her no-nonsense approach to family law matters. "Will she be there?" Michael asked, the question's subject needing no clarification. Bennett nodded. "Amanda arrived 5 minutes ago with her attorney and," he hesitated, "a male companion. I believe it may be David Mercer." A flash of anger tightened Michael's jaw. The audacity of bringing her accomplice to this proceeding suggested either supreme confidence or desperate defiance. "She's hoping to provoke an emotional reaction," Bennett continued quietly. "Don't give her one. Judge Winters values composure and clarity." Michael nodded, a lifetime of professional restraint serving him well in this moment. The doors to courtroom C opened, and the bailiff called their case number. As they filed in, Michael caught his first glimpse of Amanda in over a week. Perfectly groomed as always, with an expression of wounded concern that might have been convincing to someone who hadn't read her private calculations. And beside her sat a distinguished-looking man, perhaps 10 years younger than Michael, his hand resting protectively near hers on the table. David Mercer, presumably, the architect of his family's destruction. The biological father who had conspired to saddle another man with his responsibilities. A tear threatened again, this one born of indignation rather than grief. Michael blinked it back, focusing instead on the judge now entering the courtroom, Eleanor Winters, her silver hair and straight posture commanding immediate respect. "All rise," called the bailiff, and Michael stood with the others, his back straight despite the emotional weight he carried. As Judge Winters reviewed the filed documents, her expression revealed nothing. Her gaze moved methodically between the paperwork and the parties before her, assessing with the impartiality that gave the justice system its power. "We are here today," she began, her voice clear and authoritative, "to address an emergency filing regarding attempted paternity fraud and related matters. This is a serious allegation, Mr. Bennett. I presume you have substantial evidence?" "We do, Your Honor," Bennett replied, opening his portfolio. "DNA test results confirming zero possibility of paternity, documented communications establishing intent to defraud, witness testimony regarding a pattern of similar attempts, and expert statements regarding the competency of my client, which the opposing party has attempted to question." Judge Winters nodded, then turned her attention to Amanda's attorney. "Counselor, your response?" As Amanda's lawyer began a carefully constructed narrative of misunderstanding and emotional distress, Michael remained focused on the judge's face. In her attentive consideration, he saw something he had feared lost: an objective evaluation based on evidence rather than manipulation. A single tear of relief slid down his cheek as he realized institutional justice would not be denied him. His age, which Amanda had viewed as a vulnerability to exploit, had not diminished his right to truth and dignity in this courtroom. The proceeding was just beginning, but in that moment, Michael knew with certainty that he had already reclaimed something essential: his voice, his agency, and his right to define the remaining chapters of his life on his own terms. The evidence unfolded methodically before Judge Winters, each exhibit building upon the last with the precision Michael had always appreciated in well-constructed financial reports. William Bennett's presentation left no room for misinterpretation or emotional manipulation. Just facts laid bare under the courtroom's unforgiving lights. First came the DNA test results, displayed on the courtroom's projection screen with clinical clarity. "Zero probability of paternity," Bennett emphasized, allowing the scientific certainty to stand unembellished. Next, the emails extracted from Amanda's account appeared chronologically. Michael watched the judge's expression remain impassive as she read Amanda's own words aloud. "His retirement accounts, the house equity, it all becomes family assets I can access for us eventually." "This communication was sent 5 months ago, Ms. Harris?" Judge Winters asked, looking directly at Amanda over her reading glasses. Amanda shifted in her seat, the composed victim persona slipping momentarily. "Those words are being taken out of context, Your Honor." "Then please provide the context," Judge Winters replied evenly. As Amanda struggled to construct an explanation, Michael noticed David Mercer's subtle withdrawal, his chair inching slightly away from hers. The partnership that had seemed solid minutes ago was already showing cracks under scrutiny. Bennett continued with methodical precision, presenting Diane's testimony next. Amanda's sister approached the witness stand with visible reluctance but unwavering resolve. "Ms. Harris, please describe what you discovered in your sister's journals," Bennett directed. Diane adjusted her glasses, a nervous habit Michael had observed at family gatherings. "I found detailed accounts of similar situations in Colorado and previously in Arizona. Amanda documented her relationships with financially established men, her plans to secure long-term financial support through pregnancy, and her frustration when previous attempts failed." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Amanda's attorney leaned over to whisper urgently in her ear, but the damage was done. Her own sister had confirmed the pattern of deliberate deception. Michael sat still throughout the proceedings, his posture erect despite the emotional weight pressing down on him. A single tear tracked down his cheek as the truth he had discovered alone in his kitchen was finally acknowledged in public record. Not a tear of grief now, but of vindication, the powerful release of being believed after days of dismissal and doubt. Judge Winters examined the journals, her experienced eyes quickly identifying relevant passages. The courtroom fell silent as she read one excerpt aloud. The key is choosing the right man, established, trusting, ideally older with substantial assets and a desire for legacy. Michael fits the profile perfectly. Amanda's face crumpled as her own words condemned her. The carefully constructed facade of loving wife gave way to the calculating strategist beneath. David Mercer was now visibly uncomfortable, his earlier protective posture replaced by the rigid stance of someone regretting their choices. "Your Honor," Amanda's attorney intervened, "my client was experiencing emotional distress during this period. These writings represent temporary thoughts during a difficult time, not a calculated plan." Judge Winters tapped her pen 3 times on the bench, a habit Michael had noticed earlier when she was preparing to make a significant point. "Counselor, the timeline established by these documents spans nearly 2 years. That extends well beyond temporary in any reasonable interpretation." Bennett presented his final evidence, the testimony of Michael's colleagues and friends regarding his mental acuity and character, directly countering Amanda's attempts to question his competency. As the presentation of evidence concluded, Judge Winters removed her reading glasses, her gaze moving deliberately between the parties. "Having reviewed the evidence presented, this court finds clear and convincing proof of attempted paternity fraud." Her voice carried the weight of legal authority. "Mr. Harris is not the biological father of the child in question and bears no legal or financial responsibility toward said child." Michael closed his eyes briefly, the judge's words washing over him like a cleansing wave. When he opened them again, a tear of release slid down his weathered cheek. "Furthermore," Judge Winters continued, "the court grants the petition for emergency divorce proceedings on grounds of fraud. Mr. Harris will retain full ownership of his pre-marital assets and retirement accounts. The family home will remain in his possession exclusively." Amanda's composure finally shattered completely. "You don't understand," she began, rising from her seat, until her attorney firmly pulled her back down. "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Harris," Judge Winters replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. This court does not look favorably upon calculated deception, particularly when it attempts to use a child as a means to financial gain. She turned to Michael, her severe expression softening slightly. "Mr. Harris, the court acknowledges the profound breach of trust you have experienced. The divorce decree will be finalized within 30 days. "Thank you, Your Honor," Michael replied, his voice steady despite the emotion tightening his throat. As the judge closed the proceedings, Amanda made one last attempt to approach Michael, her expression now desperate rather than manipulative. "Michael, please, we can talk about this. 38 years can't end this way." Robert stepped protectively between them, his brother's shield until the end. "Those years ended the moment you decided to use him," he said quietly but firmly. Michael stood tall, looking directly at the woman he had loved and trusted for nearly 4 decades. "The truth matters, Amanda." "It always did to me." With those words, he turned away from her for the final time. David Mercer had already slipped out of the courtroom, abandoning Amanda to face the consequences alone, the co-conspirator deserting the sinking ship. As Michael walked down the courthouse corridor, surrounded by supporters, The burden of betrayal seemed lighter with each step. The public vindication, the legal protection of his assets, the freedom from Amanda's manipulation, all combined to straighten his shoulders and lift his chin. Outside, the autumn sun broke through clouds that had threatened rain all morning. A fitting metaphor, Michael thought, for the clarity that had finally emerged from the storm of deception. The truth had prevailed, not through emotional appeals, but through the methodical presentation of evidence, the approach that had guided his professional life, now salvaging his personal one. A final tear escaped, quickly wiped away as he descended the courthouse steps toward whatever came next. Not a tear of grief or anger now, but of release, the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. He would write himself, on his own terms, with the hard-won wisdom of experience. The divorce papers lay on Michael's desk, the final page awaiting his signature. 62 years of life, 38 years of marriage, all legally concluding with a single stroke of his pen. The house was quiet, save for the familiar tick of the grandfather clock that had witnessed decades of his life's moments, both joyful and painful. He lifted the pen, a weighted cross his colleagues had given him upon retirement, and signed his name with a steady hand. Michael Andrew Harris. The signature was firm, decisive, not the trembling scrawl of a broken man, but the clear mark of someone who had faced betrayal and emerged intact. Through the window, he could see Robert in the garden, helping load the last of Amanda's possessions into her sister's car. The division of physical property had been straightforward, Amanda taking only what was indisputably hers, her earlier demands silenced by the judge's unambiguous ruling. The emotional division had already occurred weeks ago in that hospital nursery when Michael had first glimpsed the truth. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of friends gathering for what Thomas had insisted on calling a fresh start celebration rather than a divorce party. Michael placed the signed papers in the envelope for his attorney and moved through the house that was now unquestionably his alone. Family photos still lined the hallway, though he'd removed those featuring Amanda. He hadn't been able to bring himself to discard them entirely. They were, after all, records of decades of his life. Instead, they rested in a box in the attic, a history he wasn't ready to erase, but needed to set aside. Opening the front door revealed a gathering larger than he'd expected. Thomas and his wife bearing casseroles, former colleagues with bottles of good scotch, neighbors who had quietly supported him through the ordeal, Diane with an apologetic smile and a homemade pie. A community reinforcing that he wasn't defined solely by the relationship that had ended. "We figured you could use some noise in this old house," Thomas said, his booming laugh filling the entryway as he clasped Michael's shoulder. The kitchen soon filled with conversation and the aroma of home-cooked food. Michael moved among his guests, accepting condolences that felt increasingly unnecessary and congratulations that seemed increasingly appropriate. This wasn't an ending to be mourned, but a deception exposed, a painful truth that had set him free rather than a loss that had diminished him. As evening approached, the gathering gradually dispersed, with promises to check in soon. Robert was the last to leave, helping clear away the remnants of the impromptu celebration. "You going to be okay by yourself tonight?" his brother asked, concern evident in the question. Michael nodded, a small smile forming. "I think I need some quiet to process everything, but yes, I'm okay." After Robert's departure, Michael stepped onto the back porch with a cup of coffee. The wooden swing creaked gently as he settled into it, a sound that had once accompanied evening conversations with Amanda, but now supported only his solitary contemplation. The night air carried the scent of his neighbor's garden, a reminder that life continued its cycles regardless of human drama. Stars appeared in the darkening sky, offering the perspective that could only come from viewing something truly ancient and enduring. He found an old photograph in his pocket, not one of Amanda, but of himself on his first day at the accounting firm, young and earnest and unaware of what lay ahead. The contrast between that hopeful young man and his current self might have seemed tragic from the outside, but Michael felt a curious connection to his younger self rather than a sense of loss. A tear formed, the last he would shed over this chapter of his life. It wasn't a tear of regret or anger, but of release, acknowledgement that while the path had twisted unexpectedly, he had walked it with integrity. The tear traced a familiar path down his cheek, but its meaning had transformed entirely. "I choose truth over comfort," he murmured to the night air, a personal affirmation rather than a public declaration. The words settled around him like a mantle of quiet dignity. His phone chimed with a text message. Opening it revealed an unexpected name, the director of a mentorship program for accounting students at the community college. Months ago, before the hospital and all that followed, Michael had inquired about volunteer opportunities for his retirement. "Still interested in working with our students this fall?" the message read. "Could use your experience and wisdom." Michael's fingers hovered over the screen. Experience and wisdom, qualities that came with age, that couldn't be rushed or fabricated. The very attributes Amanda had attempted to exploit were being recognized as valuable in their own right. "Yes," he typed in response. "I'm available to start next week." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked up at the night sky again. The future stretched before him, different than he had planned, but his to shape nonetheless. There would be lonely moments, certainly, adjustments and recalibrations, but also possibilities that had been obscured by deception. The swing creaked rhythmically as Michael gently pushed with his foot, the motion soothing and familiar. The house behind him was quieter now, without Amanda's presence, but it was a clean quiet rather than an empty one, the silence of truth rather than the hush of secrets. As he rose to go inside, Michael took a deep breath of the evening air. His shoulders, which had carried such tension over the past weeks, relaxed beneath the weight of his cotton shirt. The lines on his face hadn't diminished, but they had rearranged themselves, fewer carved by stress, more by the gentle smile now forming. The door closed softly behind him as he stepped into the house that now truly felt like his home again. A space defined by honesty rather than deception, by choice rather than manipulation. Michael Harris, at 62, was not ending a life but reclaiming one, on his terms, with hard-won clarity and with the quiet strength that comes from facing betrayal and choosing integrity regardless of the cost. The last tear had dried. The path forward beckoned. Isn't it something, the way trust breaks? You know that feeling. Sitting alone at a kitchen table meant for two, or staring at a photograph suddenly shadowed by doubt. We've all been there, haven't we? That moment when certainty cracks and the world tilts sideways. Like Michael in that hospital corridor, watching tears blur his vision as everything he believed about his life dissolved in an instant. The betrayals that cut deepest come from those closest to our hearts. After decades of building a life, of morning coffees and evening conversations, of weathered hands held through good times and bad, the discovery of deception feels like the floor giving way beneath feet that thought they stood on solid ground. It ain't right what happens to good folks who've earned their peace. The quiet dignity of your years suddenly questioned, your wisdom dismissed as paranoia, your judgment clouded by others' lies rather than your own limitations. But here's what I've come to believe. There's a special kind of strength that only comes after 60 years of living. It's in the way you recognize patterns others miss, in how you value truth over comfort when younger souls might choose the easier path. It's in the methodical patience that knows some battles can't be rushed. Remember how Michael gathered his evidence piece by piece, how he stood tall in that courtroom when others expected him to crumble. That wasn't just a man fighting for his assets. It was someone reclaiming his worth. We've seen enough sunsets to know that darkness passes, sat on enough porch swings to understand that forward motion comes from pushing against resistance, dried enough tears to recognize that even the deepest grief eventually gives way to calm waters. Your heart, like Michael's, has weathered storms that would have capsized younger vessels. The lines on your face aren't just marks of time, they're evidence of survival. Perhaps that's the gift hidden within betrayal's painful package, the reminder that we are more than the roles others assign us, stronger than the deceptions others attempt. When Michael chose truth over comfortable lies, he wasn't just ending a marriage, he was honoring the wisdom earned through decades of living. And isn't that what we're all trying to do? Stand in our truth, protect what we've built, and face whatever comes next with the quiet dignity that comes from knowing exactly who we are. Betrayals, tears, resilience, and all.